Believe it or not, but as a guy who's really fond of action side-scrolling platformers, I hadn't played any Mega Man games until summer of 2013. I have been the biggest fan of Some Call Me Johnny since 2011, and he is actually the main inspiration for the content that I now create. It was around that summer of 2013 that he reviewed the classic Mega Man games, and I ended up trying the games myself. By the time I got to Mega Man 2, I grew attached. Since then, I've explored the franchise quite a bit and ended up greatly enjoying Mega Man X on the Super Nintendo. Not too long ago, I replayed the game and its sequel, and because I started this YouTube thing in March of this year, inspiration to review Mega Man X struck me hard, and well, that's why we're here today. When the original classic Mega Man series reached its 6th installment on the 8-bit NES over the span of 6 years, people were losing interest in the games due to lack of innovation, resulting in decreased sales. With the transition to more advanced 16-bit gaming hardware, lead artist Keiji Infaune saw an opportunity to branch out from the original Mega Man titles. The main goal was to do so without sacrificing their fundamentals, and after much brainstorming and long hard work by Capcom to introduce a new flavor of Mega Man X was born and had groundbreaking success. The game has been widely acclaimed by critics and fans ever since its original debut in 1993 in Japan and 1994 everywhere else, and was a long-term commercial success. In fact, it's often praised to be one of the best designed games of all time. While I certainly like Mega Man X, do I agree with that assessment? And hey, how does the enhanced remake on the PlayStation Portable, Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, fare with me by comparison? Let's bust her up for my review of Mega Man X. The events of Mega Man X start with archaeologist Dr. Kane finding the remains of famous robot designer Dr. Thomas Light's lab several meters below the surface. In there, he stumbles upon a capsule containing X, the first of a new generation of robots that are capable of thinking, feeling, and making their own decisions. On the capsule, Light had left a warning that X needs to be tested for 30 years to ensure he wouldn't cause harm to humans. Realizing the tests had already completed, Kane opens the capsule to free X and studies Light's design notes, allowing him to create his own Reploids based on Light's systems. Roughly half a year later, Kane's most intelligent Reploid, Sigma, turns against humanity for motifs unclear and takes along most of the other Reploids, together forming a group referred to as the Mavericks. X is taking the news very personally and joins Zero, leader of the Maverick Hunters, to go after Sigma. X quickly gets wrecked by Vile, one of the Mavericks, but is then rescued by Zero and encouraged to become the strongest version of himself before engaging in a new battle with Vile and ultimately Sigma. The plot is actually the first aspect of Mega Man X that has been changed from classic Mega Man. The overall tone and setting is definitely grittier than before, and the story itself is more complex. On top of that, a different villain than Dr. Waiwei has taken the spotlight, and new additional fan favorite characters like Zero also debuted in Mega Man X. I do have to nitpick and say that piecing together the described events is impossible without looking them up online or owning the original manual. The game itself dismisses a lot of context that you want to be aware of should you want to get into the lore of Mega Man X. This was a common problem amongst early 90s side-scrollers, but if a more engrossing story was supposed to be one of Mega Man X's selling points, then the game certainly would have benefited from containing the same level of detail as the manual. To its credit, the game does establish a goal for X regardless that is also relevant to you as the player, to defeat Vile and Sigma by growing stronger, so I don't think I should be too harsh. I'm just a little disappointed, you know? What I'm not disappointed with is the actual gameplay of Mega Man X. As intended, it's fundamentally identical to the original Mega Man series. You jump and shoot through 8 immediately selectable stages filled with numerous enemies and obstacles in order to reach the respective boss encounters and obtain their weapons by defeating them. After that, you're tasked with overcoming a series of ultimate final levels where the challenge suddenly ramps up and finally taking down the big bad guy. Down to the controls and some basic mechanics, X feels spot on with the original Mega Man. He is simply a joy to be the boss over, with flawless controls that never put you in unfair situations. You can effortlessly change his trajectory in midair, manipulate his height by holding or letting go of the jump button, and he doesn't pack any momentum that could lead to traction issues. To some, this may give X a stiff and fixed feel when they are used to, say, Sonic's free-flowing and momentum-based controls. But for a game like this, I feel either is fine, honestly. Now, X wouldn't be as exciting to play as if he was just Mega Man, right? So that's where his new wall jumping and dashing abilities come into play. Upon contact with a wall, X can jump off of them or slide down to move up or down and quickly gain or lose height. And the dash makes him capable of traversing stages at a fast pace and clearing gaps in a comfortable manner. These two movement upgrades may seem like minor additions, but they considerably impact the way X handles the level design and the pacing of the game. Stages contain more vertical progression and are a tad broader than classic Mega Man ones to accommodate for these abilities, and the amount of cheap deaths you'll have to suck up is minimal given that you grasp all of X's exclusive moves. They're very helpful for dodging enemy fire or physical danger and saving yourself from certain
surprise motherfucker
moments and the ever so infuriating knockback that inevitably comes from them. Things get real interesting when you start combining the dash with wall jumping, as tons of possibilities for approaching enemies and obstacles open up. Clearly, original Mega Man could never dream of being as mobile as X, but in terms of their offenses, they are closer to each other. By default, X has the X-Buster that can fire puny little bullets in rapid succession, or be charged to release a big shot that deals double the damage. It's a pretty competent weapon by itself, to be frank, that generally won't make you feel outclassed by the opposition. However, the biggest staple of all the Mega Man Classic and X games are the various weapons you collect by taking down bosses, the Mavericks in this case. Each and every of these weapons you acquire have a different attack shape, radius and speed that could prove more efficient in certain situations than others. Additionally, enemies and bosses have weaknesses and resistances to all the available weapons. For instance, the rolling shield makes mincemeat of the angular or whatever, while the homing torpedo is very effective against the Boomer-Ku Anger Maverick. Needless to say, this alone already adds notable depth and replay value to the game for those willing to realize the maximum potential of their arsenal. It's not for everybody. Some will end up using the sufficiently capable X-Buster 75% of the time. And I also found the Storm Tornado and Fire Wave to render much of the rest obsolete for taking down regular enemies. These two are all I ever needed for that. There is another ridiculously broken weapon when used in a particular fashion, but I won't spoil what it is. When it comes to defenses, X is actually more of a wimp than original Mega Man initially, as backwards as that sounds. He begins with a considerably smaller health bar, but in the end he takes the cake by having expendable health via heart containers, 4 collectible sub-tanks that restore your health and can be refilled infinitely, and 4 armor upgrades. These items are what Mega Man X's motif of growing stronger mostly alludes to, and they were included into this new series because role-playing games had been rising in popularity. In all of the stages you can find at least one of the mentioned items, and I like how the majority of this stuff is hidden. There is no cryptic nonsense, instead you're often required to do some decent outside-the-box thinking. You'll either notice something suspicious looking that has you feeling something's gotta be there, or be forced to use your weapons in a clever fashion you didn't think of yet. You can revisit previously conquered levels, so if you just keep struggling to pass a specific section later on, you're able to snoop up some items you may have missed or possibly couldn't get earlier. Cleared stages can then be left at will for maximum efficiency when hunting for them items, though by some twisted logic, you can't escape the stages you have yet to complete. The hell is that all about? The non-linearity of Mega Man X's stage setup and the way it affects your experience is what puts the game's depth and replay value over the top for many fans and non-fans alike. Not just thanks to the weapons and upgrades you get in an order that almost feels customized to you, but also the way some stages change depending on what stages you have gone through previously. The best example is how the Flame Mammoth level is filled with dangerous lava floors and jumping fireballs normally, but is entirely frozen over once you've beaten the Chill Penguin stage, allowing for easy and painless progression. The amount of little nuances and details present in Mega Man X make many playthroughs fresh experiences, assuming you don't spoil the surprises for yourself by looking them up online. It's quite amazing how long-lasting this game can be for the genre it falls in, a side-scrolling hybrid of platforming and running and gunning without having a difficulty selection. The difficulty is instead really dictated by the weapons, armor and items. The more upgrades you amass, the easier the road ahead becomes. When you remain all naked well into the journey, however, Mega Man X is very tough. The benefits to this are obvious. The game remains accessible for rookies, also thanks to unlimited continues and a password system to save progress, yet can be made as challenging as veterans desire. This idea is best illustrated via the boss battles. If you happen to have the correct weapon at your disposal and manage to discover a Maverick's weakness, tons of damage is easily inflicted, putting you at a good advantage. Too much of an advantage in a couple of instances, I'd argue. The moment you decide to take down the Mavericks with the regular X-Buster, however, many of the fights become intricate face-offs where observing behavior and attack patterns is the name of the game. You gotta master wall jumping, optimize your precision, pay attention to visual cues, know when to play it safe or take risks. They put many of your skills to the test like good boss battles are supposed to do. Assuming I limit myself to the X-Buster and preferably also forbid getting any health upgrades, a significant portion of the boss fights turn into affairs I truly can't get enough of. That's just how I am. I enjoy crazy hard battles. Unfortunately, the subject of bosses does segue us into my first of 3 complaints that I have with Mega Man X. About half of the Mavericks are too difficult as first choices. It is dependent on the RNG and player skills, but tell me honestly, who could beat Sting Chameleon as first boss as a newcomer to this game? I bet most could not. The biggest culprit in this regard is Armored Armadillo, who's virtually impossible to kill without the correct weapon, as his damage output far and beyond exceeds that of yours otherwise. This pain in the ass design of not being able to conquer certain stages without their key items found elsewhere can leave a sore taste in one's mouth starting out with Mega Man X, or even for good. You can't pull a stunt like that in a game where any of the 8 stages are selectable from the get-go. In my eyes, it should be a bonus that another stage has been overcome beforehand, not a damn near necessity. Some may argue that it adds to the mystery of what Maverick is weak against what weapon and the satisfaction from figuring out the right order of progression. Personally, I just think this is bad design. These elements of mystery and satisfaction can be perfectly present even when a boss is beatable without any additional fluff. You know, it's awesome to annihilate the non-offending Mavericks after learning their weaknesses, but you would stand a fair chance against them regardless. My second problem is that the dash is not part of your default moveset. As much of a defining attribute it is of Mega Man X and its level design, the dash is an upgrade found in one of the stages. Essentially, the entire game is heaps trickier and slower until the player decides it's time for said stage. It could be one of the last ones he or she picks, who knows? To add insult to injury, a massive chunk of the remaining items and upgrades require you to have the dash in order to reach them. I don't mind going back and forth a bit between stages when certain items and upgrades are only obtainable with a specific weapon or whatever. In fact, that creates suspense and curiosity. You're looking forward to coming back to this place, searching every nook and cranny in a more fleshed out form, and it feels rewarding when it pays off. Nevertheless, so much stuff is locked behind the ability to dash that it can become downright maddening when the choices you've made are against you. Bottom line is, the dash should have been available to X from the get-go. I don't see a valid reason for it not to be. See, I am a huge fan of side-scrolling action-type games, as I stated in the intro, so I was able to brush off the tedium of the bosses and the dash and continue having a good time. Not everybody has the same degree of tolerance though, and certainly if you don't have a healthy dose of patience in video games, Mega Man X has the potential to be a frustrating, padded-out chore that's only difficult for arbitrary reasons. My last criticism, which is more a personal gripe of mine, is the game's big prioritization of combat over platforming. The classic Mega Man titles focus on gunning down robots and whatnot too, but they often have some well thought out and challenging platforming nicely balanced in. Mega Man X feels lacking in the latter department, seeing how the layouts are pretty harmless with regards to bottomless pits and stage hazards. There is some decent platforming to do in the Boomer Kuwanger and Storm Eagle levels, but on the whole it's blatantly missing, and reaching bosses is not very hard as a result. A larger emphasis on taking down enemies on solitary ground isn't inherently bad. If that was Capcom's vision with Mega Man X, then so be it. But in my opinion, there are missed opportunities for more intriguing level designs. It's also in part to the artistic design of Mega Man X that the actual stage environment seems so standard to me. Give me flack all you want, but I don't particularly care for the graphics in this title. Backgrounds come across as too static and generic half of the time for 16-bit standards, and in general, I don't get the impression any of the system's hardware is pushed. Only for the processor, a slowdown is rampant when too much is going on. The engine is patently missing some of that blast processing. Ignoring that, nothing's wrong with the visual direction and presentation of Mega Man X, and if you happen to adore it, more power to you. It looks adequate and appropriate, animates fluidly, and is now again entertaining, but I wouldn't hesitate to remark it as my least favorite aspect of the game. I mean, it's surely not the gameplay, but neither is it the music. I'm going to state the obvious now, Mega Man X's score is pretty marvelous. The only substantial thing I hold against it is the mediocre quality of the PCM samples with this cheap and flat sound to them. But when the compositions themselves are off the hook, I can live. The songs in this game are incredibly memorable and therefore loved by many. Storm Eagle, Armin Armadillo, Spark Mandrill, Boomer Kuwanger, and Chill Penguin are my favorites, but I like almost every single piece in Mega Man X. There is some decent variety, though this type of Japanese synth rock with overdrive guitars in the forefront as the lead, and strings or brasses subtly mixed in as chords or counter melodies, seems to be the most common. What matters is that it all either enhances the atmosphere of a stage, increases the current drama, or elevates the on-screen action appropriately. Such is the job of a soundtrack. The fact that it's worth listening to outside the actual game for me is the icing on the cake. What's now left to cover is Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, released in 2005 in Japan and in 2006 in all other regions. With the launch of the PSP, Keiji Infaune and his team were considering a Mega Man X9, but decided it would be better to remake X1 all the way up to X6 to rediscover what made the original X series so classic. While X1 indeed ended up receiving this treatment, the 5 sequels did not due to the undesirable sales of the first remake. Nevertheless, we're still diving into Maverick Hunter X to see what has changed, for better or worse, and what is left untouched. The main aspect about this remake that really separates it from the original SNES title is the storytelling. Starting a new save file will have players watching an optional intro scene where they're given the context of the game's world and its circumstances, and finishing a playthrough reveals backstory on the origins of X. On top of that, you can unlock a 24-minute long anime called The Day of Sigma that sheds light on how and why Sigma has gone Maverick. I've never seriously watched any anime, so I don't know the standard for the medium, but from what I was reading, it's surprisingly well animated, written, and voiced. All I can say myself is that I admire such efforts for a remake, and that I was entertained by the short movie. The same writing and voice acting carried over to the in-game dialogue sessions, and even though I think both are a bit cheesy, that might actually be what I enjoyed it for.
Maverick? How dare you call my artistic battle style by that name?
The Maverick voices and personalities are hit or miss, but Mark Gotha, the actor for X, put in a lot of emotion and delivered a very solid performance.
I'll finish this! Right here, right now! I will defeat you, Sigma!
That doesn't mean he constantly has to shout the name of the weapon he's firing during gameplay though. It's really irritating. As for the actual gameplay, Capcom went with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach. X has the same superb control, same moves, same weapons, and same upgrade potential. The level designs are largely identical, and you still face off against the same bosses with the same weaknesses. With that said, there are a few adjustments made that fans of the original game will undoubtedly pick up on. The first of which being that the 4 armor upgrades are relocated to different stages. I view it as a harmless toss-up that, if anything at all, is simply interesting for the fact you have some new routing to do for an optimal playthrough. Secondly, all 3 Sigma stages sport new layouts, and as far as I'm concerned, they are solid improvements. Every area is now thematic and corresponding with the upcoming Maverick rematch, in addition to being trickier overall with more platforming to do. There are also some slight tweaks when it comes to weapon properties and boss behavior, speed, and attacks, making the game overall a tad easier, and you can now leave any level you've entered at any time without the need to run out of lives. As a result of the weapon and boss alterations, I found the game less guilty of having unbeatable Mavericks, but it's still definitely a problem. This is assuming you play the game on the normal difficulty, because Maverick Hunter X also includes a hard difficulty where enemies hit harder, rendering a good set of Mavericks entirely out of the question as first choices. You will definitely need the right weapons to destroy many of the Mavericks in this mode. I don't think that's bad design in this particular case though. It's reasonable of the game to expect you to know what you're doing when the hard difficulty is purposefully selected. Another new feature of Maverick Hunter X is the Vial mode, which, you guessed it, allows you to play through the entire game as the villain Boba Vial Fett, complete with its own what-if non-canon story. You plow through the same stages and fight the same bosses, but Vial has his own weapons that all drain the same energy meter, one coming from his head, one from his arm, and one from his legs. Each default weapon is pretty weak, but by defeating a Maverick, you acquire a new set of weapons with unique properties that can be equipped to a specific body part. Every weapon requires a certain amount of the maximum allowed points to be selected, preventing Vial from becoming an indestructible god. And the more levels you clear, the more points you have available to you. Like with X, you can find heart containers and sub-tanks in the levels themselves for more health, and Vial also obtains 2 special armor upgrades by finishing specific stages. Vial mode is alright, but I don't think the formula of Mega Man X complements his weapon system all that well. The bosses seem to have multiple weaknesses, so chances of them becoming total duck soup are moderately high, but then in the odd cases you happen to have equipped 3 ineffective weapons, you'd better be ready for some long, tedious battles. There are too many variables here for me to draw a good conclusion after 2 playthroughs, but I can say that the difficulty balancing is way off. Vial mode is, however, fully optional, so I don't feel the need to be harsh on it, and some players may like it as a bonus. No harm, no foul. For some stupid reason though, only one single song plays during all the 8 main stages, which of course gets incredibly repetitive. Speaking of music, Maverick Hunter X's soundtrack is pretty good stuff. All the old compositions make a return, so that's automatically a thumbs up, and their arrangements or remixes are tasty. Half of the songs stay true to the original source with superior instrumentation, while the other half have a new sound to them altogether, almost like a genre change. I never would have imagined dance or trance vibes suiting Mega Man X, but I was proven wrong as everything blends in with the newly redesigned graphics. I'll be honest and admit I don't dig how all the tunes came out, Armored Armadillo and Storm Eagle being my primary examples, but on the whole, the two renditions of the soundtrack trade blows for me. I cannot pick one over the other. Thought I was forgetting the visual overall of Maverick Hunter X? Of course not. With a remake like this have to come more advanced graphics. The game has an updated 3D look that kind of rubbed me the wrong way starting out with a plastic toy look the models have to them, which is an artistic direction I am not too fond of and don't think fits the Mega Man X universe. However, soon enough, I started noticing the stage environments themselves and how much more detail and color they have to them. Thanks to the superior hardware of the PlayStation Portable, the set pieces managed to come alive via animated assets, various weather and sun ray effects, sharp textures, and multiple background layers for true three-dimensional depth. The system is capable of more, and it's disappointing to have slowdown issues with that fact in mind, but when it comes to the visual presentation, I prefer this over the SNES original by a decent margin. It looks great on the PSP screen. From what I've read of online comments, I might be one of the few people who considers Maverick Hunter X a worthy remake of the 16-bit classic. With that said, I'm sticking to my guns. The fun run-and-gun gameplay and non-linear level structure remain fully intact with minor tweaks and additions, and while the reimagined graphics and music may not be everyone's cup of tea, this version has, hands down, more to offer when story is the subject matter. Besides the voice acting and Maverick portrayals, nothing in Maverick Hunter X that I was able to spot anyway could be seen as offending or insulting to the original. I wouldn't say it replaces the SNES title, but it's satisfactory for what it is. Even critics gave this remake good scores at launch. It's just a shame it was released on a handheld seen as a joke instead of a powerful home console. If the latter was the case, the subsequent remakes would have likely seen the light of day as well. On to my closing comment on Mega Man X as a whole. While I am not keen on certain design choices and find the level design sort of underwhelming, it remains an extraordinary game and a promising start for a new line of Mega Man titles. X controls gorgeously with new exciting mechanics, he has a solid, if unbalanced, selection of different weapons to toy around with, and there's some addictive upgrade fetching to become more powerful. Mega Man X is all about the discovery, and if that's your thing, a very enjoyable and replayable adventure is awaiting you. If linearity has your preference and you wouldn't appreciate running into nigh impossible boss encounters and missing the majority of power-ups, consider playing through the game with an online guide at hand for the best possible experience. Mega Man X is still fun that way, just not as exceptional. Avoid the SNES original cartridge unless you're a collector and go for either the Wii's or Wii's Virtual Console re-released instead. Or better yet, if you live in North America, the Mega Man X collection on PlayStation 2, which contains X1 up to X6 and is thus the best value out of all the available options. A physical copy of Maverick Hunter X for the PSP won't hurt your wallet either, and it can even be downloaded digitally for additional compatibility with the PlayStation Vita. I cannot make the decision for you on whether to go with the SNES or PSP version, or both, but I'm sure this review has given you enough to think about because this script was 4,800 words long. I had a lot of points I wanted to document for Mega Man X and Maverick Hunter X. Well, as usual, I hope the video was entertaining and that you all have a great day.